Trauma is incredibly widespread throughout society. There's a huge physical and emotional cost to carrying trauma. It affects the background of all of our lives because it so deeply affects how we relate to each other. Even though there is so much research and more mainstream conversation about trauma, the causes of trauma, and the effects of trauma, there's still a lot of misunderstanding. We tend to think that our trauma is in the painful experiences that happen to us. But trauma is actually a wound, or a shock, or an injury. It doesn't refer to an event per se, but its impact on us. Pain and fear is unbearable sometimes, depending on our genetics, our upbringing, and of course, our social support. When someone feels unbearable pain, they feel that their life is at risk. Our body and mind set up various new systems to bear intense pain. When this happens, when we're bearing pain, we then live inside a new world that we didn't live in before the trauma. Life begins to feel very different, and we get used to this new difference very quickly. This is a key point, and one that's worth underlining again and again. These new systems that we create in the wake of unbearable pain or distress, they become common very quickly. And we get used to being numb, for example, or we get used to being on high alert. We get used to being afraid. What happens in this new world? What happens in this new world where scars have tremendous power? Well, it's really different for everyone. There's no singular blueprint. But it's important to underline that there's no conscious decision to enter this new state. A trauma world is not accessible to language. It's actually in our hormones, in the structure of our brain, in our nervous system, and in our musculature. The body changes, and so does perception. And this in turn changes how we feel and how we relate to the world, and of course how we relate to others. Since we're relational beings, our new systems for living, our new habits, our new coping mechanisms, they have an effect on the people around us as well. The effect of trauma is not just internal, it's ecological. So let's try and sketch an outline of what this new trauma world looks like and feels like, even though it can be very individual. I'm offering this sketch so we can recognize it in ourselves, in others, and the way self and other interact. There are three characteristics of this new trauma world that I'm describing. The first is fear, the second is dissociation, and the third is shame. I'm going to break each one of these down. But first, what kind of experiences create these characteristics? What kind of experiences create trauma? There are the definitions, of course, that we're used to hearing about: extreme neglect, war, witnessing an atrocity, violence, or assault. But another area of trauma that we don't hear as much about, or that we often minimize, is feeling unloved or feeling inadequate as a child. This is complex and hard to name because it can be traced through parenting styles over generations. Parents and caregivers who are traumatized or depressed or ill, they often can't attune to a child, for example. And most of the time, our grandparents were traumatized, and then it passed intergenerationally.